This is an interview with Kathy Buckner, retired faculty member and director of the nursing program from Elgin Community College. Kathy was employed by the college from 1970 to 1993. This interview is being conducted on October 2nd, 2017 at her home in DeKalb, Illinois. The interviewer is Polly Nash and the videographer is Jack Weiss. Thank you so much, Kathy, for being part of our oral history project.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Great. Why don't we start out with just a little bit about your own history? Can you tell us where and when you were born and a little bit about your family?
Okay. I was born in Battle Creek, Michigan, and some time ago in 1934. And I grew up in Battle Creek and in Saginaw. We moved to Saginaw when I was going to school. I went to the Catholic school through the 10th grade and then went to a public school and then graduated from Arthur Hill School in Saginaw, Michigan. After that, I went to Michigan State and I studied nursing there. And at that time, the nursing program was 4 years and 4 summers.
So it was full year?
Full year around, yes. And we spent 2 years on campus and 2 years in a hospital, in many different hospitals, actually.
And so that was much more extensive even than the baccalaureate programs now.
Well, it had a lot more clinical in it than the current baccalaureate programs, yes. And I did spend some time nursing for a couple of years in pediatrics in Midland. After we graduated, my roommates and I decided to find a place in the middle of Michigan that we could all go to, so we went to Midland, Michigan, which was a delightful city. I met my husband there, and we just had a great time there. We got married maybe 2 or 3 years after we arrived there, and I was still working, and we decided to move to Missouri. So we've kind of moved around a little bit.
Anyway, in the Midwest.
In the Midwest, yes. And we stayed in Missouri for quite a while. And in Missouri, I taught at the University of Missouri, just the clinical, part-time, because our children were coming quite fast at that point. We had 4 children, and they were pretty close together. So I also taught the pre-natal classes.
At the University of Missouri?
No, this was for the city.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they had a program there. Then we moved to Washington, D.C., and we lived there for quite some time. And I worked in the emergency room in Washington, D.C. And then we moved to DeKalb.
So you came back?
We came back, yes. We came back to the Midwest. And since we were so close to NIU, I decided to get a master's degree in nursing at NIU, which I did. And then we moved. My husband was on sabbatical, so we went down to Florida for a year. And I took classes down there also. And then I got back to DeKalb and realized I was very, very close to a doctorate. All I needed was my dissertation. So I proceeded to get that. But in the meantime, I had applied to ECC. And
what made you apply at Elgin Community College?
Well, I probably would have applied at NIU, but they were full, and we didn't get back until September. So I did get a part-time job. My youngest was at that time in kindergarten, okay. So I had to be home at noon. So Margaret Gabler was so nice to me. She accommodated my schedule, and so I was able to work part-time. And then when he got into the first grade, I worked full-time.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And here's a picture of Margaret.
Yes.
And so can you talk a little bit about her, your experiences with her?
Well, Margaret was a very gentle, bright lady. And she and Gil Renner were the instigators of the nursing program. Gil Renner had this idea in his mind that ECC should have a nursing program, and contacted Margaret. And Margaret then was the organizer and so on of getting it done. And Margaret and Bethel Olson were the real creators of the nursing program. Both very, very talented nurses. And then the only other person that I recognized on the faculty was Sue Walker. She was on the nursing faculty at that time, and there was another lady, and I can't remember who she was, but there were 4 people at that time, and very few students, of course.
And so when you came and you applied, you were first an adjunct faculty member, and then you applied and became a full-time faculty
Full-time,
member.
yes.
And so there was the director, and then there were just three faculty members?
Correct. To the best of my recollection now.
That's oh yeah, isn't it? Take that back. And so tell me about what the facilities were like when you came there.
Well, I had not had any experience teaching, so I couldn't tell you at that point whether they were, there's a deer. There's 2. Sorry.
That may come out.
I know. Yeah, we have those. They don't have their spots anymore. Anyway, of course, the teaching at that stage, we didn't have computers, we didn't have anything that was electronic, really. Mm-hmm. It was all voice and demonstration.
So you did have clinical sites.
Yes, we did.
But where you had taught before, you had been doing clinical.
Just clinical, correct.
So this was your first experience actually teaching in a classroom environment.
Yes.
And so what was that like, your very first teaching?
Well, I had a half-hour lecture, and I had almost 11 pages of notes. Does that tell you anything?
Yes.
I was so afraid I was going to run out of material before the hour was up. But you know, that goes away, fortunately. And it was different in that actually it wasn't so different for me because it was clinical as usual. So
you were responsible for some clinical work too, in addition to the teaching?
The second year I was, yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
And where were some of the clinical sites?
Well, we probably the primary one was Sherman Hospital. Sherman and St. Joseph Hospitals in Elgin. And then as we got more students, we needed, of course, more clinical space, and we went to Delner Hospital then. And for psychiatric nursing, we went to the Elgin Mental Health Center, which was at that time open.
That was before.
Right.
Before some major changes there.
Yes. Yes.
So what were the students like at that time?
The students that came into the nursing program at that time were older students, particularly as it got going. So many of the students were single mothers who realized that they needed to make money. And nursing was one of the occupations that jobs were very much available. So we got mature, dedicated, motivated students. They were fun to work with.
But they were all females?
Oh yes, at the beginning, yes. It wasn't until maybe, well, I can't pick out a year, but it was, maybe a few years after that we began to get male students.
And do you remember any of your male students?
Oh yes, yes, yes. We had one male student who was excellent in the nursing, in the clinical area, but he had trouble with tests.
With the academics.
And we were so worried about him with state boards. And I think the first state boards at that time were 5 tests. And he passed 3. And so he had to take 2 of them over. And when he graduated, it was like we should have a party. We were so happy with him. And then we had another male student who thought he should be in charge. And the girls voted him president of the Nursing Association. And I didn't offer any opinions on that.
And he was voted president.
He was voted president, and he did okay.
He did okay.
Yeah. It just seems like when you have one male in there that he shouldn't take over. I'm a feminist to start out with.
You had a very strong student organization.
Yes.
The Associated
Nursing students. Yes.
So can you talk some more about what made them such a strong organization as a student organization?
Well, first of all, they were older. And they were women that were working in their own neighborhoods, their own churches. They were very well organized, and they got things done. And one of the things that they did get done was pinning. They did their own pinning.
So when you talk about pinning, I have a picture here from an earlier pinning ceremony.
Yes, and this is Margaret.
Okay, and that's Margaret
doing the
pin there.
Yes.
And so tell me some more about what you mean by a pinning ceremony.
Well, the nurses regarded the pinning ceremony as they had made it. And it was a really joyous celebration. And this group was very, very well organized. So they, in order to save money, dealt with the pin man himself.
What's the pin man?
The pin man is the guy that organized, that sold the pins.
Oh, okay.
Well, it worked several years. It worked very, very well. And the pin man was kind of a little, kind of a nervous guy. And one year, the girl who collected the money had a crisis and spent it. And that was a big crisis. So I remember telling her, I don't care if you have to rob a bank, you have to get that money back by such and such a day. Well, the pin man, who was a little volatile anyway, kind of exceeded his volatility level. And from then on, the bookstore had to sell the pins, which made them more expensive. Mm-hmm. But, the powers to be made their point. Anyway, that was our pin experience. And the pinning went on for a few more years, but then it was decided that they were not going through graduation. So the pinning was downplayed. And I don't know if they still have pinning or not. But it was just a glorious celebration at the time it was.
And
there.
The pin, was it?
Just a little round. Blue and gold pin.
Oh.
Yeah.
And it had the
ECC.
ECC.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Nursing program.
Very nice.
Mm-hmm. It was.
And they planned that whole celebration.
The whole thing was planned by them.
So
yes.
Who was going to be speaking
mm-hmm.
and what was going to be served, etc. So it was
they had a big dinner. Yes, they had a big dinner. It was a real celebration.
Yeah.
And it was within their own group. Now, when they went through graduation, it was within a much bigger group, and it wasn't quite as intimate.
Right.
So.
Because they always went through in the cohort, didn't they?
Yeah, they knew each other,
And they would take the same classes together.
Not necessarily.
Oh, they wouldn't, okay.
No, they mixed up.
But they would stay in pretty much the 4-semester sequence?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
And when you started there, I'm thinking about your facilities, you were in one part of the campus, and then there came a time when the nursing program moved to what was called the North Annex.
Correct.
Can you talk about that?
Well, of course, that's when the nursing program started getting quite popular. We may have started with maybe 10 or 15 students, and we were, after that, taking in at least 120 a year. So we're talking 240 students. Mm-hmm. Not that it was ever that full. I mean, students do change their mind, and this isn't for them. But, we needed a lot more facilities. So that was good for them. Now, in the North Annex, however, there were probably maybe 8 faculty members in one big room for their offices. And there were many crises that came up, and there was really nowhere where they could go for privacy. Mm-hmm. So that was one of the things about the North Annex that was not positive. But other than that, we had our own classrooms, and we rescheduled them, and that worked out very well. And we also had a nice big lab, and we had one person in the lab to help students maintain their clinical skills.
And so you had a lab where they did some practice with
Yes.
the clinical skills,
Yes.
as well as going out to
The clinical,
hospital
right.
or other places.
They practiced, giving each other injections and things like that, so that when they went into the hospital, they didn't have to say to a patient, "This is my first shot."
I understand that the nursing program, when you were over in the North Annex, that you started something about smoking.
Oh, I did, and I was not popular.
Why don't you tell us more about that?
All right. There were quite a few smokers. I mean, the nursing program was stressful. There was a lot to learn. And the students that we had were probably more stressed out than average community college students, because so much depended upon their success. And there were a lot of smokers. And on test day, the whole thing was cloudy. The halls were cloudy. Well, I'm an ex-smoker. So I at least understood. But we also had childcare in that building.
So you had the tot spot?
We had the tot spot, and we had 8 people in an office. And, that can get pretty cloudy also. So I faced my unpopularity, and I got the direction to forbid smoking.
And so you moved to the North Annex, and your program continued to grow. And at some point, you moved from faculty member to the director. Can you tell me about that transition and how you handled moving from a colleague to a supervisor?
Well, there were quite a few years between that. I had worked at NIU. I had gone to Florida with my husband, who was on sabbatical. So there were maybe 3 or 4 years in between that. And I really liked the community college program, the nursing program. Now, I taught a couple years at NIU, so I had a little understanding of the differences between the two programs, and I was impressed that a 2-year program, actually it isn't a 2-year program because they have to get all the other classes first, so it's really a 3-year program. But I was impressed that they could do it in that time. And the people that we had in our program were not the 18 to 20-year-olds. They were the older students who really didn't want to spend 4 years. And we had a very good registration rate when they took their state boards. So we had a good percentage.
There was always, if I remember correctly, very strong scores that your students always had on their state
They did.
boards.
They were very bright. They were motivated.
Yeah.
They were fun to work with.
Right, exactly. When you were at NIU, what was the attitude of folks at NIU about community college nursing programs?
Oh, well, it was primarily negative. They weren't getting enough, and it was, but NIU, I should say this, NIU was favoring a public health type of program. That was their, they expected their students were going to be teachers and school nurses and work in public health.
Which is different from at least Elgin's focus.
Right. They were primarily going to be hospital focused.
Right. So that's where your clinicals, your students' clinicals were. When you became the director of the program, what did you see as some of the challenges and opportunities for you as a director?
Well, one of the things that I did when I became a director, the National League for Nursing, we were accredited by the National League for Nursing, and I became a visitor. And I got to go to many different colleges, community colleges, and I could see, what things that they were doing that I could bring back to our program, and I did, many things. There were a couple programs that I thought I could get started that didn't work out. One was for students to go the first year and get a nurse assistant program, and then I guess maybe that was one semester, and then go 2 semesters and get an LPN, 2 semesters past that and get an LPN, and all of these credits would get them to the RN.
So it was sort of a ladder.
It was a ladder program. It didn't work, so that didn't last.
The skill set so different.
Yes.
That they just
didn't materialize.
But what happens, isn't it, that you understand the differences in that skill set, and it helps everybody appreciate what each level of nurse does.
Correct. Correct, yes.
And so you have to try.
We did try.
Yeah. What other challenges did you see as a director of nursing?
Well,
what about technology?
Well, technology was it. We didn't have the internet, of course. And if a student...
There was a life before the internet?
There was a life before the internet. There was a long life. And, if they wanted to read something about, read an article, they had to go to the library. And then all of a sudden, here was all of this information that they could just get on the internet. And we did develop a program of, we had a lot of students who would not touch a computer. This was in the early times of, it was way before cell phones. And we did have a computer program. We had, the computers we had in there were, I think, cast-offs of some other agency, but we did get them to at least get a few skills. I could just see that was going to be something that was going to blossom.
Right, revolutionize.
Yes.
Nursing careers.
Right. And now, of course, they have mannequins that do everything. We had plain old mannequins that just laid there. And we washed them.
And you were glad to have them.
We were glad to have them, yes. Yes, you're right.
What about the role of changes in science and what your students were learning about science?
Well, those things change all the time. There are new diseases. MRSA was not something we knew anything about early in the days, and there still are diseases that are being identified now. Drugs, that has changed dramatically. And of course, there are so many programs that they can get into. I mean, practically on YouTube, you could, tap into some of those programs.
Right, but that wasn't available.
No, that wasn't available.
You were at the cusp of all of these
things. Right, which was fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I liked the computer right from the start. Yeah, I think I was saying that I was a fan of the Apple IIe.
Was that the little? Was that the little one?
No, it was pretty big. Yes, no, and I got excited about it, and then I tried to get my secretary excited about it, and she did not have the same enthusiasm that I did. So, but she did pretty well.
Trying to keep up with you.
Yeah. Well, it was just one thing I liked.
Yeah. Early into your tenure with the college, there became this thing of joint agreements.
Yes.
In 1972, the very first one was with ECC in Waubonsee, where automotive students could go to Waubonsee for their training because we didn't have an automotive program, and dental assisting students could come to ECC for our program. And then soon thereafter, didn't something happen with nursing?
Yes. And this was a product of Jack Galdoni's enthusiasm. And we had a memorandum of understanding with Waubonsee. We would take some of their students into our program. They would teach them the science courses. McHenry would teach them the science courses, but then they would come to us for nursing. And they were good students. It worked out very well. And I looked on the computer just recently to see if Waubonsee did have a nursing program, and they did get their own program.
Yes,
so,
they do.
Yes.
But it's a way, and early on, a way of serving more students that didn't have that program in their own district.
Correct. Well, the nursing program is expensive.
Yes.
So,
Because you have a lot of faculty, and you can't have a big class of 30 in a clinical, that you've got to have a smaller group of students.
Right.
Yeah. What were some of the other challenges that you might like to talk about?
I can't think of any at the moment.
All right.
I will as soon as we leave.
You worked under a number of presidents, from Mr. Renner, who was just finishing up then, to some other ones. Do you have some recollections of any of them that you would like to share?
Well, Mr. Renner was the one that really spent the most time in nursing. We were in a separate building, and very few of the presidents really came over.
Came over to the North Annex.
That's right. But
especially in the winter.
In the winter, no one, no.
But you saw Mr. Renner?
Oh, yes.
What were your recollections of him?
Well, he had a wonderful sense of humor. He was a very bright man. He had dreams and possibilities. He just encouraged you to keep thinking. So, and he and Margaret worked so well together.
Yes. And so when you came there, Margaret was there.
Yes.
And then at some point, did she retire, and then you became the director?
Correct.
And did
I
you
followed
keep
her.
Up with her?
Yes, I did. Actually, she got married to a Mr. Pickett. So she was Margaret Gabler Pickett. And she literally moved to a mountaintop in Tennessee, Well, Mr. Pickett died several years after they were married, and Margaret moved to a assisted living area, and we took a trip south, and we stayed there and had just a delightful day with Margaret. So,
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Can you recall some of your interactions with Margaret while you were on the faculty there?
Well, Margaret was a very encouraging person, and she was so nice to me, because I was not as comfortable yet, but she seemed to think that I had possibilities.
I think she was
Yes. And yes, yeah.
So she was encouraging and supportive.
Very supportive, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And a good first leader of the program.
Oh, she was wonderful, yes.
So what were some of the things that you said to yourself, I want to make sure I continue that, or you learned from Margaret?
Well, Margaret was the type that if she had a student who was having a lot of problems, she met with the student and she worked with the student. I mean, she was into individual success. And I was very impressed with that. And I often tried to get faculty members who were maybe disappointed in a student to follow that kind of a relationship.
Because sometimes we don't know what's going on with the students.
No, especially
and
these.
And they're not right.
Yeah, especially with these women were just in such not all of them, but they were in crisis, many of them.
So you learned that from Margaret.
Oh yes.
And talk to me about Bethel.
Bethel was just one of these very bright, very accommodating. Her students loved her because she was always there for them. And she was one of these, she took right after Margaret as far as trying desperately to get these women successful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so you learned from her too.
Oh, of course. I actually learned from all of the faculty. All kinds of traits.
That's what a good director does.
Well, I guess so.
We have a picture of both Bethel and Margaret.
Yes.
We believe it's one of the college's anniversaries.
It must have been. They both have corsages on.
Uh-huh.
Yes, they were wonderful people.
And that was after they retired.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they came back.
Yes.
Yeah, they came back to visit.
Right. Are there any others that you would like to recall? Any other individuals that you worked with or taught with?
Well, I taught with just a lot of very interesting teachers. Just the way they taught. Some of them taught kind of scientifically, and some of them taught compassionately. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you understand that, but it was kind of fun to watch them.
Each one you learned something new.
I learned from all of them, yes.
Very nice. At some point, I think it was in 1993, you decided to retire.
Mm-hmm.
And can you talk to us about your decision to retire?
Well, I have 4 children, and 13 grandchildren. And the grandchildren were in the vicinity, and I decided that I wanted to spend some time with them. And also, I wanted to travel. And the job that I was in, I could not travel with, because it was 11 months. So I just decided that it was time.
It was time.
Mm-hmm.
And so what have you been doing in retirement? I understand you're busy.
Yeah, pretty busy, yeah. One of the first things I did is that I took the Master Gardener program. So I was a Master Gardener for a while. Loved it. And then we have traveled to Europe and the Middle East, Scandinavia, Central America, Africa. We've been a lot of places. We've been very blessed with our travels. And I was also a hospice volunteer for over 20 years. My mother had hospice when she was very ill, and enjoyed that. I still work at a food pantry. Going back and forth has been a lot of fun. So
right.
Back to Arizona.
So this is your winter home, and your summer home.
Summer home, yes.
And your winter home is in Arizona.
Correct.
Right. And so we were lucky to get you before you
Well, thank you.
to Arizona.
I was lucky.
If you don't mind, I'd like to close this by having you do some reflections on your career at Elgin, what you think about the many years that you spent there.
Well, I think probably it was an educational experience for me, because I learned so much from, first of all, the students, and also the faculty, because they were all into something different, and they liked to share it. So educationally, it was very good. Psychologically, I learned that people, faculty and students, had things going on in their lives that made a difference in how their days were going. And I learned to be a little more patient with that. I see ECC's nursing program, blossoming. And I had a meeting with 3 members of Kishwaukee College. And when they found out that I had been the director at ECC, they were telling me what their impression was of ECC now, and it was very, very complimentary. So, I feel like I've been part of something very good.
Absolutely. You and Margaret set us on a good track.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure the directors who have come after me have maintained that.
Right. Well, we thank you so much for sharing your time with us, sharing your insights into your career and your work with the nursing department, and your bravery in prohibiting smoking. You were at the very beginning of all of this. Thank you so much, Kathy.
My pleasure.